Hey, welcome to the Underlords universe where we deal with all kinds of stuff, rock and roll, heavy metal, horror movies, sci-fi, etc., etc. And here's the deal, folks. We're not professionals. We're just like you. We're just like you, just fans. And all three of us, my colleagues here, Brent, Josh, we've all seen the new film, the Last Voyage of the Demeter. And we thought we would just give it a little chit chat, see what we think about this thing. Before we go any further, though, we might say some things. If you haven't seen the movie, spoilers. There's probably going to be some spoilers here. So if you haven't seen it and you want to go to another YouTube video, now's the time to do it. But if you want to stick with it,
come back and watch this later.
Yeah, and come back and watch this later. But if you want to stick with us, that's cool. Follow our YouTube page, sign up to get little notifications. Maybe make a comment or two. If you think we say something that's a little wacky or ridiculous, feel free to chime in. But here's how we're going to do this. We're going to basically do it as a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or a thumbs sideways to kind of get us going here. So on the count of three, guys, 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay.
Whoa!
Now, since I'm in the middle on this,
We didn't stage that.
no, we did not stage that. But since I'm in the middle on this, I'm gonna use myself as a starting point. If our system required us to go up or down, I would inch towards up. Okay, so I'm a little more this way, but
Hey, can I do so I'm like this, but it's kind of more like that?
sure. It's like
I'm like this, but it's a little more like this.
okay. So here's the deal. Overall, I thought it was good. I didn't think it was great. I thought it had a lot of potential that it didn't quite live up to, which is why I kind of gave it a sideways. But I didn't dislike it. I actually would like to see it again at some point. But I'm not like running out to seeing, like I'm not going to pay money to see it in the theater another, within a week or so. What do you guys think? Why, Josh, why did you go with a thumbs down? Brent, why did you overall go with the thumbs up?
Brent, I'm gonna let you go because you're more positive. So I'm gonna let you say your positive stuff, and then I'm gonna shoot it down.
Okay, well, for starters, I didn't like the movie as much as I wanted to like it, or as much as I thought I would like it. I was really excited about it after seeing the previews. Um, I was hoping that it would be kind of a original Alien movie aboard a ship with Dracula, with a claustrophobic feel, kind of like you don't know where the alien, or in this case Dracula, is. He's somewhere, but you don't know where he is, and he's going to pop out, and he's going to, something bad's going to happen. Very claustrophobic. I was hoping for a very creepy, atmospheric vibe, and I didn't really get that. But I don't think that means the movie doesn't work. I think the sets are really good. I think the casting was really good. I didn't necessarily. I liked how Dracula was kind of had that 1922 Nosferatu appearance, as Brian has on his shirt there. I did not necessarily like the whole, flying through the air and the bat wings thing. That reminded me a little bit too much of Jeepers Creepers. If anybody out there remembers the creeper from Jeepers Creepers. Dracula was very animalistic in the movie, but at the same time, he would do things like smile at the camera when he was bashing somebody's head onto the ground and killing people, which I thought was interesting, to have kind of that, again, a very animalistic approach, but also indicate that he enjoyed what he was doing when he was killing people. They did some things that were unconventional, where, like they killed off the kid relatively early on in the movie, which normally you don't do in a movie like this. But I think overall it lacked suspense. lacked the claustrophobia that I wanted, and it wasn't creepy at all. I mean, it wasn't scary. I was not in suspense, and there was no climax. The movie kind of moved pretty slowly, and we didn't really have a climactic ending like you do in Alien when Ripley faces the xenomorph. We didn't have that really in this movie.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you gave it a thumbs up for an awful lot of negative comments.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's still a decent movie. I mean, if I give it at least 2.5 or 3 stars, I'm going to give it a thumbs up. I'm pointing out some things about that I didn't like, but again, I did like the cast. I like the acting. I like the sets. I like the Nosferatu appearance. I like the premise. The premise of the movie is great. Doing a movie based on this one chapter of the story is brilliant, and it lends itself to a great movie. Unfortunately, rather than a great movie, I think they just put together a decent movie.
Yeah.
So for those reasons and detractions, I would still give it a thumbs up. But if I was going to rate it on a scale of like 1 to 5 stars, probably 2.5 or 3.
I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. I just think I respond to it a little differently. And I agree with you. I was really excited. The preview looked great. It's a great idea. I mean, this part of the Dracula story as a whole movie is like, wow, what a great idea. I agree with you. I think the visuals were good. I think the cast was good. I think they did some things like killing the kid it's like, wow, okay, wow, they killed the kid. That was interesting. And I thought it was actually paced pretty well. So it wasn't a total train wreck, I mean, but here's my beef with it. You are set up for success with this movie. You've got a great idea. You've got a well-made movie. You've got a killer villain and the ideal story. And the story itself, you mentioned Alien, and this story itself is not that unique. Alien, John Carpenter's The Thing. These are basically the same story. I'm trapped with a monster and I can't get away. I have to deal with this monster. And it just doesn't play out in a very compelling way. And I mean, and part of the problem is you've got a villain like Dracula. I mean, who's played Dracula? You've got Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee, Jack Palance, Frank Langella, Gary Oldman, Leslie Nielsen. These are all great actors that have played Dracula. And what do we get for Dracula in this movie? Like a really pasty, white, mediocre CGI bat person that has no real personality, that kind of shows up and is like, eh. And it's like, oh, I knew that was going to happen. I knew that was going to happen. And it just was kind of like, there's no personality to arguably one of the greatest villains in literature, in horror. I mean, it was just kind of like, yeah, okay, there's that thing.
Can I interject on that point?
Sure.
Couple things. And I don't disagree with you. But the film isn't Dracula's voyage to England. It's the last voyage of the Demeter. It's not a story about Dracula. It's a story about the crew.
But it doesn't matter to me.
Well,
any story is as good as the antagonist. And, you could argue, well, maybe Dracula isn't the antagonist. Maybe the tension of being in this story is the antagonist itself, and Dracula is secondary. But even on that regard, I don't think they really hit it. It was kind of like,
well,
yeah,
I agree.
It's okay.
I actually agreed. I think to Brent's point, it never, to me, and I agree with him, it never really felt really
Creepy.
claustrophobic. It never really felt to me like there was a whole lot of peril.
Right.
It was just like, well, what's going to happen next? So I don't disagree with you on that. But and I do think it's actually really risky to make a film that features Dracula that's not really about Dracula. So I think there's some risk there from a filmmaking point of view. One thing I will say is, you know, in the age of Twilight movies and sparkly vampires, I was happy to see a vampire that just looked disgusting. And
Yeah.
and you know, to your point, you know, Max Schreck, you know, played Dracula in Nosferatu 1922. The Klaus Kinski version 1979. You know, those feature or Brent, help me out. In
Shadow of the
Salem's
Vampire.
Lot.
Oh, sorry.
In Salem's Lot, I can't think of the vampire's name in Salem's Lot, but you know,
Orlok.
No,
no,
that's
Count Orlok. No, Count Orlok is Nosferatu.
I thought that's what it was in Salem's Lot, but
No,
I could be
it's
wrong.
not. I'm just drawing a blank. But the bigger point I'm trying to make, though, is that, you know, those vampires kind of all kind of share an aesthetic. And I think that the one thing I actually really did like about Last Voyage of the Demeter is that they really stuck with that aesthetic. This was a Dracula that visually was in line with Salem's Lot, the two versions of Nosferatu, etc.
I don't disagree.
Mm-hmm.
The visual of how they presented Dracula was not the problem for me. That they gave the antagonist virtually no real personality or verve was a bummer, because to me it's like, you've got an opportunity here and it just shows up and jumps out or flies around, and it's like,
I agree.
eh. And you know what this movie really made me think of is The Sea Haunt from 1965. And if you've never seen it, it's an episode of Johnny Quest. And it's virtually the same story. And, you know, the Johnny Quest characters, it's a cartoon from the 60s. They end up crashing in the sea and have to get on this freighter. And on this freighter, there's a monster. So, sounds familiar. And they're stuck at sea on a freighter with a monster. And in 22 minutes, I feel like The Sea Haunt just had so much more drama and was so much more interesting and so much more suspense and creepier than this movie. And again, I don't give Last Voyage of the Demeter a complete thumbs down. I mean, there were redeeming factors, and it wasn't a train wreck. It disappointed. I think it could have been so much better.
Yeah. I agree. I think that what this comes down to is degrees.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like we all agree it could have lived up to you know, a little bit of a higher
well. And Josh, would you you and I kind of talked about the same thing about the animalistic approach to Dracula, and at the same time trying to give him some personality. Would you have liked it better if, you know, even with that Nosferatu Salem's Lot appearance, if you would have had more of a personal quality rather than just being something that just, like, you know, jumps out of the shadows or flies at you and bites your neck or smashes your face into the ground? And
I was going to make a joke. I was going to make a joke about Leslie Nielsen and how I would have preferred to see Leslie Nielsen as Dracula in this movie, but I'm not going to do that. I will say that, you know, when you look at movies like Alien and John Carpenter's The Thing, you know, that was a monster. It wasn't a person, but I felt like those creatures had a real personality. You got a sense of dread from those, whereas this was just like, So I think that I don't have a problem with their approach and the look. I wish they would have invested a little more in, let's give this thing a sense of personality, because I just didn't get anything from it. It just showed up and
I agree. Like in Alien, the xenomorph is like a killing machine.
right. You almost get a sense of personality out of it, even though it's almost an animal. And
right.
And the same in John Carpenter's The Thing, and the same in with the amphibious monster in The Sea Haunt from Johnny Quest.
Right.
They really imbue the creature with a sense of verve and drama, whereas this was just kind of there. And
Bland.
and it was just kind of like, yeah. So I mean, again, it's not like the worst thing I've ever seen. I just think it could have been a lot better.
I think the actor who played Dracula was a good. I mean, the guy's like 6'7", very, like 130 pounds. But there was also the CGI element of it that I didn't care for. Is it wasn't
And
too
I'm
much.
not anti CGI. I think that
No.
I think you can actually create. I think we've gotten to a point where you can create CGI characters that actually have character that involve acting, and so I don't want to blame it on CGI.
No, and there were some good scenes with Dracula where I thought he looked really cool, but they were pretty fleeting. Dracula's not in this movie very much for people that haven't seen it. He's really not. But that kind of goes to the point Brian made. It's not really a movie
Right.
about. It's a movie about the crew and the voyage, and I felt in watching it we didn't really get to know the crew as well as we might have wanted to.
I mean, I
Kind
agree,
of,
and I think there was a lot of opportunity there, and you've got, I think the characters, the woman in the movie, I think her name was Anna. I could be wrong on that, but what it wasn't very satisfying. I mean, and what an opportunity! You've got someone who, I mean, if I'm understanding it correctly, and maybe I'm not, I think she was packed into one of those coffins and was serving as Dracula's food.
right.
And if I'm understanding correctly, I think her village put her there.
Hmm.
Um, so she's almost sacrificed by her village or by her family to serve as food for this vampire. And
Hmm.
when they retrieve her and she comes out of it, it's like, wow, what an opportunity for trauma, what an opportunity for to display something. And it wasn't really there. Like once she recovers, she's just like toting guns and walking around like, oh, it's a creature, it's something that haunted my village. And it's like
I kind of
that's a
thought
missed, that was a missed opportunity. I just felt that was a missed opportunity for the
I
story.
agree. I kind of thought she was like, oh, this is the crazy Ralph character from like the Friday the 13th movies. It's like oh, we call him Dracula. He's on this ship, which means no one's going to get off alive. And they're like, what? What? But I agree with you. Missed opportunity. And there were a lot of them in the movie. But I did like her character, and I thought it was interesting how they introduced her and incorporated her into
The
this.
introduction was really interesting, but it
Yeah.
never, like a lot of things with this movie, I would say there was a lot of great setup,
Mm-hmm.
but then the follow through is kind of like, oh, okay. I mean, it wasn't like, it was just kind of like,
Kind of the execution was lacking a
yeah.
little bit. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Brian, what do
Yeah,
you?
Brent, you started this off by giving it a thumbs up, but when you went into describing it, the first thing you did was a pretty long litany of things that you had issues with. So let me bring it back to that. It sounds like for Josh and both of you, it sounds like, and me as well, we all kind of share some of the same or similar kinds of gripes with it. It's just a matter of degrees to what that spoils the movie experience. So for me, I had high hopes but low expectations. This movie was originally slated to come out in January, which is usually when studios dump horror movies they don't think are going to do well later. It was in what they call development hell for like 20 years, gone through different screenwriters, different producers, different directors. And it was like, that doesn't sound like it's going to bode well, So I didn't have very high expectations going in. I had high hopes, though. I was really hoping for a good movie, and because of going into the movie with that kind of mindset, I left kind of thinking, oh, wasn't so bad, you know. Could it have been better? Yeah. Am I going to rush out and see it again tomorrow? Nope. No.
See, it's so interesting because I have such a different perspective. In, I think the outcome of how I feel about it is the same as you, but my feeling is this movie was a slow pitch. You've got arguably the greatest villain. You've got a plot that has been tried and true in so many great horror movies. The plot is there and it's great.
Mhm.
The villain is there and he's great. And it was well filmed and it was well acted. But despite all of those things, it was just it wasn't the worst thing I've ever seen. But my expectations were much higher. It's like you've got this is a
Mhm.
slow pitch, man. You ought to hit this one out of the park.
Yeah.
I have a question for you guys.
Hmm.
So let's talk really quickly about how the movie ended, because I thought the ending was predictable. Um, Number one, I was a little bit surprised that he made it back to shore because he was quite a ways away, and I thought that he might actually not make it. But it was a little bit cliche, was it not, to have that ending scene where you see Dracula in the hat and the coat and the cane, and there's that connection that he makes with the doctor, and it kind of looks like they maybe even set it up for a sequel. What did you guys think about how the movie ended? We've talked a lot about what happened in the movie, but how do you think it? What do you think about the ending?
Can I start on that one?
Please.
So the way they portray Dracula on the ship is, except for a few of his facial gestures, extremely just animalistic, almost like he's just operating off of instinct. So to
Subhuman.
then suddenly have him in like an overcoat with a hat on in a bar doesn't really work for me, which I think gets back to Josh, to your point about what they're doing with Dracula as a character. I also think it would have been actually more effective if everybody died on that ship. And if at the end, if they're going to set that up for, because that is kind of a scene that sets things up for a sequel. It's like, oh, if this does well at the box office, maybe we'll, finance a sequel. It's like, well, okay, fine. Do you have to have the doctor? I mean, can't he just kind of make his way ashore and,
Or not? Or not?
or maybe he swims. I don't know.
Or maybe the ship runs aground. It's derelict, and either you find bodies on the ship with these bite marks on the neck, or you don't. Or maybe there's no Dracula, there's no animal, there's no nothing. The ship is just there's no life or signs of life on the ship. You could still do a sequel with that. Dracula could he could still be on the mainland. What happened to
there's an implied sequel, and the sequel is called Dracula because this is part of the book Dracula. So
right?
they're messing with canon to have
Well,
someone from the Demetrius survive. And you've gone through this trauma and this horror, and you come to shore, and somehow you make it to shore. And then, oddly enough, you don't go to the authorities or anything. Now, you could argue, well, he knew that he would be dismissed and ridiculed, and okay, I mean that's fair. But it's like now you're the vampire hunter. I don't know. It wasn't like the worst thing I've ever seen, but it was a little bit of a flaccid ending to me. It's like, oh,
I like Brian's comment. He's this just a beast, an animal on the ship, and then but he wears a top hat and a coat, and he goes into a bar.
well,
It's not like Bram Stoker's Dracula, where there were like two different kinds of Dracula. There was the nice Gary Oldman Dracula in one guise and persona, and then sometimes he would appear as this bestial creature. We didn't have that in this movie, but again, in that movie, they really flushed out the character. They made Dracula real.
That's it right there. And the movie almost is basically just saying, hey, Dracula, he can be a monster or he can be in a top coat. You already know this. And to a degree, it's like, okay, fair enough. We already know that. But to me, I think what makes a great movie is you tell me again, you show me again how that can take place. And they didn't really do that. They kind of fell short. It's like, yeah, he can be this or this. But there was a real opportunity to demonstrate that, I think, better than what they did. And they just kind of, I mean, to me, it's almost the term I'm going to use. And again, this movie isn't that bad. I'm really trashing this movie, and I don't mean to, because it's not a horrible movie, but I felt like the whole movie was kind of just phoned in.
Yeah. So I'm getting the sense that, like, you've seen it. You probably would never watch it again.
Maybe.
And, yeah.
You know, if
And-
it's out there and it's free, if I can stream it for free and
Mhm.
it's out there and I'm watching like vampire movies, I'm making a theme night out of it, I would throw this one in. You know?
And see, and that's where I'm at. It's like, I kind of tend to agree, except for me, the reason why I go with a thumbs on the sideways rather than a thumbs down is because there are elements of it that I like enough that I'm looking forward at some point to seeing it again. It's like I do know I will watch this again. And to me, a lot of it comes back down to the aesthetic of Dracula and just having another vision of Dracula that has that kind of Nosferatu type presentation, just because that's so lacking in
Yeah.
yeah.
And I'll give it points for that. I mean, it does fill part of the mythos in it, and it that needed to be filled. And I think for me, it's like I did have higher expectations.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all did, to be quite frank. But one other thing, I'll finish my comments with this. I think as a period piece, it really works,
I agree.
and the sets were great. The ship looked great. The bowels of the ship looked good. It
Yep.
looked dark and gritty, but again, it lacked that claustrophobic atmosphere that I was really looking for. And I think, I asked myself, why did you go to this movie? What was it you were expecting to get out of it? And, how much of that did you really get? And, maybe, again, maybe 50 or 60% is what I got out of it. But the settings were really cool. And I did like a lot of the visuals, aside from Dracula and everything. I think as a period piece, it worked really well. And for those of us who like those types of movies, this really did do a good job with that.
So, it just goes to show you can be disappointed in something and still enjoy it.
Yeah, I think you guys have helped me kind of go from this more to something like this. So
Okay.
I'm
That's
still
cool.
sticking. I'm stuck. I'm there. But yeah. So at any rate, if you've seen Last Voyage of the Demeter and you think that we're completely off base or whatever, throw a comment in and follow the YouTube page. That would be greatly appreciated. Would just like take just a moment, unless you guys have anything else about the film that you want to throw in.
Nope.
Okay. Just want to say, here at the Underlords Universe, not only do we talk about stuff like this because we're fans of all this stuff, but we like to make stuff too. We like to record and record music, write stories, etc. So just a quick little nod on that stuff. Oh, excuse me for a second. Got my props here.
Gotta have the props.
Yep. Not only is our site called the Underlords Universe, but we have an expanded Underlords Universe fictional world written by H. Prescott Lemon. Josh, do you want to say anything about who H. Prescott Lemon is or what he does with this?
he's a very shadowy, mysterious writer, pulp writer, who is inspired by a lot of stories like Dracula and stories like sci-fi and fantasy, and
Yeah.
tries to connect that into the musical world of what we do.
And we all, to one degree or another, play musical instruments. We like to write and record music, and we've got accompanying instrumental and some non-instrumental music under the banner Underlords of the Overworld. So it's kind of an expansive thing that we've created over the years. We're going to put some links into the description. If anybody's interested in checking some of that stuff out, feel free. There's Facebook, Bandcamp, underlordsuniverse.com, etc. So if you're looking for kind of that underground thing to dig into, the Underlords is deeply underground. It's about as underground as you can get.
As underground as you can get.
Yeah. Which makes it very cool. So yeah. Okay. Well, Any other thoughts? Last thoughts before we sign off?
No, it's a good
It's been
discussion.
fun.
Looking
Yeah.
forward to the next one.
Yeah. All right. Well, see you guys later, and have a good one.
You too.